everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mike Reviews It All. To my right, I have a great guest today, Nakken. She is a children's author, and you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe one of the books that you brought with us?
Sure, and one of the things I do want to tell you is, like everybody else, you say Nakken. Nakken.
I apologize. I should have asked. It's got two K's too, so.
And you know, I think you're interested in my books for young people, but I really don't have a genre. I write across all the genres, and my last book does happen to be for middle grades. It's the first in a series about a 12-year-old girl who goes back in time and makes a difference. She goes back in time with a magic necklace to a historical place that most of our 11, 12-year-old kids have never heard of. And the purpose of the book, of course, is to teach them some history and let them have a little fun. I will warn the reader and the listeners to this podcast, however, that this is really a little chick book. Your 11-year-old girl is going to love it. The boys not so much. That's the last one.
Well, that's good to have a genre. I have a lot of people with daughters out there. Fantasy's definitely really popular right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's popular again, you know, the Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, of course, that, you know, stands the test of time, but the fantasy is really popular again right now. People are really getting into that, so I think that's a great genre right there. Just a second, if you guys want to look down below at the links I'll have on here, you can like and subscribe the video. Also, there's some links to JR's website and some other ways to find out more about her, and definitely how to buy some books.
Yeah.
So, what was the first book that you read?
Oh, the first book that I read, I was reading the day I first skipped school in kindergarten.
Well, we have a lot of common then.
And oh gosh, I have it at home, but I can't at this moment tell you the name of it. Someplace in here it tells me the name of it, because this book, Stream and Light, A Woman's Journey, is actually a memoir of my colorful life. And it's in 37 short pieces, so it's easy to read. And that book was called, what does that say?
The Tale of Sandy Chipmunk.
The Tale of Sandy Chipmunk. The first story in that book is the first day I skipped school in kindergarten.
There you go, kids. Skip school and read, and your life will turn out better. No, no, just kidding. But what got you interested in writing? Was there a certain author that inspired you? Or?
I was a precocious child, and I read before I went to school, and I went to the first grade when I was 4 years old in a little town of 50 in South Dakota.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there were like 14 kids in 8 grades. And so I learned to read when I was 4 years old. And I just read everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a great escape for a lot of kids. Yeah, I remember first getting into reading. I mean, first real book I remember reading was The Lemonade Trick. I don't know if that came out, I think, in like the 80s. But it just got me hooked on reading, and then I read a lot into Stephen King and a lot of other different things. You come across to me as very humble, you know, and do you think ego plays a part in an author's writing? I mean, can it be a positive? Is it always a negative?
If I come across to you as very humble, my life's work is over, because arrogance is my #1 character defect. And I have battled it for most of my adult life since I discovered it. As far as ego, I think it depends on what we call ego. If it's flamboyance on the best and you're nothing, I don't think a writer needs that. But the ego that I can write this and put it on the page so that they feel it, I can do that. That's a good and positive ego. So I don't really have an answer to your question.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you say that, because what I think of as ego is you have ego, and what you're talking about is self-confidence, self-esteem.
Yeah.
And I think the self-esteem and self-confidence is what a person knows of themselves. And the ego is the front that people kind of put on for others.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and that's just kind of, my thing. So tell us about your first book that you published. So.
The first book that I published isn't the first book that I wrote. When I retired, semi-retired, and moved to the Tulalip Reservation, I said, all my life I said I was going to write a book. So I sat down at an old 360 with a dot matrix printer, and I wrote 120,000 words till I put the end on them. Now, only about 4 of them were golden words, so it never got published. But I learned a lot from the rejection slips. So the first book that I had published was this one. It's called 3 Point Shot, and it's for young adults, but I have never seen a sweet-minded adult who read it that didn't love it. Honest to God. Goodness? Can I say honest to God?
Yeah, I think we're still okay for that. I don't think we're going to get demonetized.
So it's a story about a 15-year-old Indian boy whose mother marries a Caucasian man and moves to Spokane, Washington. And he has to go to school in an all-white high school. And it is, I researched the Spokane High School and all of the surroundings, and the original story is from my Native American husband. He wasn't a basketball player, but he told me one day when we were dating about how it felt to be the only Indian face in a white high school in Montana. And the look on his face stayed with me for the 30 years it took me to write the book. That's 3 Point Shot. It won a Writer's Digest award the year it was published.
Your memory really impresses me. How much you can remember from back, because, I'm only 38 years old, and you remember things much more vividly than I think I do, different memories and different things and stuff, and that's a gift and something. I'm sure it's just that you play things through in your head.
I think that's part of a writer's equipment, is the ability to put themselves back into the time and the feelings. And I'm able to do that.
Yeah.
So when I tell you that this book, Martian, Schoolgirl, which I'm going to show you in a moment, I'm sure, and this book, Stream and Light, are absolutely true, they are absolutely true. Those things happened exactly as I remember them.
So, we were talking, you don't look your age. Tell me, how old are you? I don't usually ask that, but you're doing very well.
Yeah, well, Confessions of a Martian Schoolgirl is the grand prize winner in Reader's Digest Association Reminiscent Magazine's memoir contest. It was a really big deal, and it covers my life from ages 4 to 16. So if you read it, you'll find out that when I was 4 years old, I went to school in 1940, and you can figure out that I'm 80, going on 81. But please, don't tell anybody, because I'm trying to pass for 79.
Well, I think you got that down pretty well. You definitely grew up in a much different time.
Yes.
We're in a time now, I think, of maybe uber political correctness. I think a lot of people are coming to see that on every side of the aisle. I think it's just been an overcorrection. Obviously, this country went through a lot of things that weren't very right, and you try to correct them, and then maybe some people with good intentions, sometimes they push a little too hard, and then I think we get emotional, and your tribal instincts take over, and now we have a lot of tension.
Yeah.
In this country between a lot of groups.
I felt real strongly about political correctness up to about 10, 12 years ago, and then we got really ridiculous.
Yeah.
I had a woman, I said something about an Indian man came by, and she said, excuse me, it's Native American. And I said, my husband says Indian, and he is one. So, I think, I do think we've gone too far. I had an editor turn down a story that I wrote that was based in the year 1958, and it talked about being in a group of black kids in Harlem, and I wrote Negro boys, some of them 7 feet tall, and she said, I really like this story, but we have to change that to African American. And I said, I can't do that. Negro was the proper word in 1958. And none of those kids knew they were African American because the PC police hadn't told them yet.
Yeah, and that kind of strips some of the authenticity from your story.
Absolutely.
I think, that timeline.
Yeah. So it ended up being published in an anthology out of Arizona, so the Negro is still in it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Out of the books you've read, I guess, is there any author that you started reading and you didn't like him at first, and you worked on and you grew into liking this author?
It's a wonderful story. It's probably too long for this podcast, but it was a Pulitzer, I think, a Pulitzer. I'm going to say Pulitzer. It was a Pulitzer winner in about 1962 or 3, and it was Missioners Hawaii. And of course, I ran to read it. I couldn't get 100 pages into it. It bored the tears out of me. And every other year, a missioner novel would come out, and I didn't read it. I don't care what it was. I didn't read it. Well, I was in bed with a lingering illness one day, and somebody brought me a box of books, and Missioner's book, The Source, was in that book, and I left it to the very bottom. I even read a romance until Missioner's book, The Source, which became about my second or third favorite book of the world. And so I ran out to get all the books that Missioner had written since I put him on my bad list, and I loved them. Centennial and, all the wonderful books that he wrote. So I thought, I better try this again. So I went to the library and got Hawaii. I couldn't get 100 pages into it. I still didn't like it. So, Missioner has given me a lot of joy, but not Hawaii.
So you just didn't like that book, and it turned you on.
Didn't like the book.
So I guess that's maybe a lesson to people that if you read a book and you don't like the book, maybe it's not the author, maybe it's just that book didn't speak to you, I guess.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important. What does success as a writer look like to you? How do you determine success?
I think it depends on what age you are and where you are in your creative process, Mike. I really do, because as a young woman, I felt that I was going to be a fantastic and acclaimed writer. And so, of course, you think of bestseller lists and the money that you'll earn and the movies that will be made from your books and what have you. And then what happened to me was I couldn't handle the rejection when I was 19, 20 years old, and I didn't write again till I was 60.
No, nobody can handle rejection when they're 19, 20, though. I know I definitely couldn't.
No. Well, as a lesson for would-be writers, do not give up. I wrote many things, many of which are in this book, Stream and Light, A Woman's Journey, but I didn't try to have them published anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And today I know that my acclaim as a writer is not. I've been validated by prizes and small awards and by someone from Missouri emailing me and saying they read a book and it was important to them.
Yeah.
And it happens very rarely. Don't get me wrong. In where I am with my books, but the heartfelt warmth is there that I created something that touched another human being, and today at passing for 79, that's enough for me because I have to write.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think as we're younger, we have different ideas of success as far as and happiness and fulfillment. We think it's about money and we think it's success.
Yeah.
I definitely went down that road, and then you start to kind of come back and you start to see, well, maybe there's some other ways to determine that. But so being in the age of social media, I mean, basically it's kind of been a tool, or maybe some might say a hindrance to authors for, pretty much this entire century, since 2000, definitely in the last 10 years. Do you think it's been a positive thing for you, or is there any negatives to it?
I couldn't begin to tell you if social media has affected me in my work at all, and for this reason. When they published Confessions of a Martian Schoolgirl as part of the grand prize, they insisted that Martian Schoolgirl have a Facebook page. And so my guy went ahead and discovered that she had to be Martian Schoolgirl. This emblem right here that you see on my shirt had to have a human sponsor. So I had to have a Facebook page. But I don't have any friends. I think Facebook is an awful tool of a well, the Christians would say awful tool of the devil, if not the devil himself. A lot of really awful stuff goes on Facebook. I don't want to be a part of it. I'm sorry. I hope that doesn't turn any of your listeners off.
No, it definitely is very hard to make an impression, and yeah, there's definitely a lot of bad stuff there. I mean, I've had some positives from it because I try to connect with family and stuff, but I definitely had to limit myself to almost not going on there much at all now because I was just wasting too much time. You sit in front of the computer and all of a sudden you look up, 4 hours has gone by.
Yes.
What could I have accomplished in 4 hours? It's like, no, I can't do this anymore. So, but that's, so what do you feel the best way is to market your books?
I haven't found it yet. I haven't found it yet. I'm a member of the Writers Cooperative of the Pacific Northwest. Their focus is on marketing self-published books. And my books aren't self-published, but they're from a small publisher. And so any of the really, except for her catalog, any of the really tough marketing has to be done by myself. And so I have this book, 3 Point Shot, is a classroom set in a couple of schools here in the Pacific Northwest, and that, of course, gets my name out. I haven't found a good marketing tool.
Yeah, it's very tough.
Word of mouth.
Yeah, I think word of mouth is definitely good. It's very tough when you don't have the budget that some of these
Amen.
companies have, and I even see that in YouTube. I mean, it used to be for independent content providers, and now they're talking about offering contracts to Kevin Hart and all these huge stars, and it's like, we can't compete with those guys, but I think YouTube will always have the kind of viewers that want to come and see raw content too.
I hope.
And because that's what it was built on, and that's what it's about. I think if it's not on YouTube, it'll be somewhere else, but I hope it's still on YouTube because I think it's a great platform, I really do, and hopefully, this channel becomes successful enough that it'd be a good idea for you to come back as a guest in the future when we have more viewers and subscribers. Like I said, hit that like button, please. Hit that subscribe button. Definitely check out the links to JR's books and her website. So what do you think was the hardest book for you to write?
The hardest book for me to put together, I am certain, was this collection of stories, because they are the raw truth of my life. And the editor says in the back, J.R. Nakken creates happy stories, sad stories, scary stories, but most of all, stories with the cutting edge of truth. So the cutting edge of truth is in these stories, unabridged. And as for the rest of them, not hard. The story was there, it rolled off my fingertips, needed very little editing, and turned out well.
Yeah.
Even my romance, I wrote a romance. Now you may notice on the cover that there's an Indian man and a dumb-looking white girl, but that's the only comparison in my real romance. And this isn't a formula romance. This is just a love story set on an Indian reservation. And it got a 5-star rating from Midwest Book Review, who reviews the books of small publishers. And, your editors, your viewers probably don't know what that means, but in the small publishing writing world, it's a really big deal, so.
You've won a lot of awards for your books.
Small awards, yes.
But you're obviously an accomplished writer, and that's what I talk about being humble, is you have really published books. I mean, I feel that if you'd had the marketing, you'd had some books that, sold a lot more copies. I think there's something there in these books. These are good books. Look at these. Support local authors. Support people from here in this area. If you're watching this and you need to buy a book for your kid, this is the time. We have to support our communities. I'm a huge small business advocate, and I've been a small business owner, and I just don't understand why people don't support their communities. And a lot of times it's because they're not educated as to how that money is used. I could go through a lot of stats as to how much 3 times more of the money spent at a local business stays in the community than from a large chain. If you're buying, offline from somebody that might even be in China or something, none of the money may come back to your community. So I know I'm getting off subject, but you go out and you look at your streets and you look at your schools and things, and you want to know how to make a difference. Support local authors, support local local content creators, entrepreneurs, yes. In your area, though, to make a change, you got to start with a small ripple. I know a lot of people have said this, but it's very true. You have to start from the inside and work your way out. You can't start with the whole world, and you might think that you're not making a change and you don't have a power as a consumer, but you absolutely have a power as a consumer. I've seen it in the retail world. I'm working for a small store right now, and I'll tell you, the place that I worked for before for 16 years, if they had one day of their business, it would change those owners' lives. Mm-hmm. And they're great people. But they're going up against huge conglomerates. And they're very price conscious. This is not a price thing at this point. A lot of times it's polish. I'm not sure. Sometimes not sure what it is. Sometimes I think it's people just following the crowd. But I know I got off subject, which I always promise to do in every episode. Let's go back to writer's block, though. Do you feel like that's a thing? Do you like that word, or do you hate that word?
I always say I'm blocked when I'm too lazy to write. So I don't know if writer's block has ever happened. But there have been times when I've been too lazy to write. I haven't written anything on my website since October. What is this? January? I realized that because the guy was working on my website yesterday, and he said, "You're not very prolific, are you?" I don't know anything about writer's block, but I do a lot of editing to support my writing habit, and I've edited this great book, which is going to be previewing here in Everett on next Saturday or Saturday, June the 3rd at Zippy's Cafe from 1 to 3. And that young writer's first book, and his name is David C. Winnie. And he approached me about 15 years ago with this concept for science fiction tales of the Spinward March and began to write them and got what he said was writer's block and didn't start writing again until about 2 years ago. But boy, what has come out with his 13 years that he didn't write is really marvelous. So sooner or later my website will have a link to David C. Winnie's new book, The Great Con, so take a look for it too. I don't know anything personally about writer's block. I know about laziness.
Bringing up other writers, you worked with some other writers. You work with other writers I know in the area. Who have you collaborated with, and how has that helped you?
I haven't collaborated. I've done critique back and forth with other writers. Now, in Everett, there's a woman named Pamela Greenwood. She's half of the writing team called Ryan Ann Hunter, and they write children's and young middle grade books. Their last issue was about women spies for middle grade girls, and it's a really good book. David Winnie that I just spoke about, another young emerging writer in the Everett area is Kevin Hart, not to be confused with the comedian. I think his book says Kevin A. Hart, and it's called 1,000 Screaming Monkeys, and it's about recovery from drug abuse. It's a really good book. Pamela Greenwood, as I said, the local author. And then my small publisher in Tucson, Arizona, her name is Lila Joyner, and she is a world-class writer in her own right. She has been absolutely crucial in my early days of putting the sentences in the right order.
Well, that's great. You've had some help, and you've given back to some people.
Yeah.
And done some editing, and this is, I'm sure, and in a second career, it keeps you busy.
It's about my 5th career, Mike.
Yeah.
Yes, I've had several careers.
Actually, we did talk about that. You've done several different things. Grew up in obviously definitely a different time.
Yeah.
We were talking. You don't text. You don't email. You don't do the smartphone thing.
I do email.
You do email, or not off the phone though. I'm
No.
sorry, I should say
Yeah.
she does email, but. Do you hate these things? Do you want to smash my phone?
I think that smartphones are great for people who don't want to use their vocal communicative skills. But to see people sitting in the same room and talking to one another just makes me want to weep.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem right now. I feel people don't have the communication skills they used to. They definitely don't. They can't even spell out full words in text. I've heard somebody doing this. When you go out with your friends, you go out with 5 or 7 people, if they all have cell phones, put your cell phones in the middle of the table, and the first person that touches their cell phone has to pay for the bill. I almost guarantee you no one grabs their cell phone.
I like that. I like that.
But yeah, I've had very rude conversations with cell phones. Actually, was at an interview where a lady actually probably spent a third of the interview looking at her phone. Yeah, and so it's like, okay, what are you here for? You know, she offered me a job. I didn't take it, which was surprising. So I'm not sure what the point of the interview was. Maybe it was a formality. Maybe they were just desperate, waiting for a warm body to walk in the door. That was probably the case.
I wouldn't put myself down, Mike.
Well, she obviously didn't have a whole lot to do. She was playing on her phone all day. But but if you're listening to podcasts during the day, that's okay, because you can get work done. You can listen to my podcast if your employer allows you. Or while you're stuck in traffic, just don't watch the video, please. That's not a good idea.
Yeah, right.
Definitely not a good idea. How long does it take you to write an entire book, you think? Or do you write one at a time, or are you working on several books at once?
Anyone who likes to write, who's watching this, I know how you feel. You've got 13 things running around in that head that want to get out. 3-point shot, we'll talk about again. 3-point shot, I wrote it in 3 weeks. Wrote the whole thing in 3 weeks. And that's not, 24 hours a day. But I wrote the whole thing in 3 weeks. Printed it out because I didn't even have the internet yet, or email, or anything. And made a couple of minor corrections. And it was published and became the first runner-up in Writer's Digest book for young people that year. So.
Well, that makes it a lot more impressive, I think, that you came out with it so quickly. That's pretty impressive. What do you think's been your hardest scene to write? Or hardest part of a book, I guess?
There are some scenes that when I reread them still, in fact, I'm getting a little, that I remember
the emotion that I felt as I tried to put them on paper.
And one of them is in one of the
Stories in this book of memoir, naturally. And it's about one of my several ex-husbands.
Sorry to have to say that. One of my several ex-husbands came to visit my daughter
in Spokane.
And the story is called
American Patch, and it won the Preservation Foundation's nonfiction prize that year. Some years ago, maybe 2005 or 4 or 6.
But the scene where
I was in his hotel room and he asked me to
open his jewel box and get something out for him
as we went to dinner.
And there lay a cat's eye ring that I had bought him when we had our brief marriage 20 years before.
And in it,
surrounding it,
was a piece of a shirt that I had patched for him.
With a patch there.
Right in the center, and the ring in the center of the patch.
And I realized as I stood there that
that was the only nice thing I had probably ever done for him. And he cared for me deeply, and he kept the patch.
And I almost couldn't write it.
I almost can't tell about it.
Yeah, well, that's obviously an emotional experience.
Certain it was the hardest thing to write.
Yeah. Kind of made me lose my concentration a little bit there. But
how about my favorite book when I was a kid?
Yeah, let's go to something happier. What's your favorite? What was your favorite book as a kid?
I happened to bring it. I happened to bring it because it's a great story.
we have much time?
We have time. We have
Okay.
as much time as you need.
This is called Tanglewood Tales.
And it was written by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
And almost anybody watching this podcast does not know who Nathaniel Hawthorne was. He wrote The Scarlet Letter. Some people still have that in college, maybe. He wrote The House of Seven Gables. You've at least heard of movies named The House of Seven Gables. Well, this is one of his books, published in about 1863, called Tanglewood Tales. And it's a bunch of stories of Greek and Roman mythology. And it piqued my young interest. I was about 9 years old when my auntie gave me this for Christmas, my Auntie Ev. And piqued my interest in Greek and Roman mythology, and I became kind of an expert on it because it's really fascinating. Now, in all of my moves as a young woman, I lost my copy of Tanglewood Tales. And on December 25th, 1981, my daughter found me a copy and gave it to me for Christmas. I don't know if you can see this or not, but if you can see who it originally belonged to and when it was presented to them. But now it's mine. Tanglewood Tales, my favorite book as a kid.
That's great. Books bring back so many memories from a childhood. I remember I read a lot of Stephen King later on, and that inspired me to 15 years of mental insanity. No. See, he's an interesting guy. I won't go too much into that, but he writes from his dreams, and I find that interesting that he's able to remember those and capture his dreams. And I'm not sure how loosely that is, but he says it's pretty exact, so I don't know.
I feel that the finest book he ever wrote was Carrie. And I do believe that sometimes authors' first books are their best books. And I also believe that some authors only have one book in them, although they write many. And one of my, when you and I were talking, you asked me what I thought an unappreciated book was. Something about little known or unappreciated book. Some of you may remember a novelist called Harold Robbins. He wrote flashy Hollywood stuff in the 60s. Got real popular, made a lot of movies. Harold Robbins with 2 B's. You can look him up on your internet. His first book was a little piece called A Stone for Danny Fisher. It's a marvelous piece of literature. I think it got picked up for a movie or something, and so he started building out all that wonderful money-making, I won't say garbage, a lot of people liked it. I read most of it. A Stone for Danny Fisher. Nobody ever heard of it. It's a great book.
Well, I see Confessions of a Martian Schoolgirl. I see that genre doing very well right now, turned into a movie, or turned into, which I think is a better way to do movies, or to do books, is like the series on Netflix. I think it's really hard and unfair a lot of times to an author to try to capture it in 2 hours. That's why I'm glad to see more series of 3-4 movies that are 3 hours piece, or like Netflix is doing right now. I don't know if you're familiar with the children's book Lemony Snicket.
Oh yeah.
They are doing a fabulous series right now I'm watching with my kids, and the acting and production and everything is incredible. It's really enjoyable, really good character.
Good stuff for children.
Yeah,
Good stuff if they're sticking to the book.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully the kids aren't looking at iPods all day and phones.
Oh.
And there's a place for those things, but you got to limit those times. There's There's a reason that Steve Jobs didn't give his kids iPads. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
Yeah, he invented the iPads. He wouldn't let his kids have an iPad. A lot of people in tech like that. Bill Gates is very protective over his kids. Very little computer time, because even though they made their livelihood in that, they understand everything that went into that, and to sell that much of things, you have to do a lot of study into the human psyche and what's addictive, and there's definitely a lot of addictive things in that technology.
Yes. Yes. My grandkids are grown young adults now. Some of them not so young, and I spent my young working woman's life buying signed books for them, going to book signings when people actually attended book signings and were pleased to get books that were signed by the author. And I bought children's books for all these kids and sent them, I had maybe half a dozen grandchildren, and sent them books for Christmas and their birthdays and stuff. Well, my one daughter-in-law is so, she really had her children do thank yous and what have you. So they called me one day after Christmas, and Crystal said, all in one breath, "Oh, Grandma Nakken, thank you so much for the very, very nice book. I like it so much, Grandma Nakken. It was so good of you to send to me. Say, Grandma Nakken, my other grandma in Pennsylvania, she sends me toys and stuff." And she stopped to finish that breath, and I said, "That's all right, dear. Your other grandma is the toy grandma. I'm the book grandma." She was about 9 years old.
Yeah, kids say a lot of things when they're 9 years old for sure, but they can spend a lot of time in books, and I think it's a lot better for them than obviously being on an iPad. There's a place, for kids playing. Even, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. We were always playing outside, and that might not seem like a long time ago to a lot of people, but it was different. I grew up in Walla Walla, and we would come home at 8 o'clock at night, or we'd come home for dinner. And I remember entertaining ourselves with rocks. Our friends, we had this game called rock wrestling, and we'd throw a big rock down, and you'd throw your other rock at it, and whoever's rock busted lost. We'd do that for hours. I'm sure you had all kinds of different games like that as kids, or seen people.
I was a weird child, and I didn't have friends to speak of. I spent most of my time hiding out someplace with a book, and I remember having this little boyfriend in this little town of 50. His name was Kenny, but in the book, Confessions of a Martian Schoolgirl, he's Carl. Because there were some people that I wasn't able to get releases from, so I had to change the names. But we used to sneak into the ice house. This little town didn't have electricity until 1948. And in 1940, 41, we used to sneak into the ice house and lay on the straw that covered the blocks of ice that people would come to use to put in their ice boxes. And that story is here in Confessions of a Martian Schoolgirl.
Well, is there anything else you want to talk about?
I'd like to talk to people who are thinking about writing and never do it. Could I do that?
Yeah, why do you think that is?
I don't want this to sound like my arrogance is showing, but I believe that I would have been a world-class writer
if I had practiced my craft since I was a teenager. I was too thin-skinned, I submitted a few things, I got rejections, and I quit. My attitude was if I couldn't be the best immediately, I wasn't going to do it. And
so over the years, the stuff just built up in me that wanted to be written.
And I know there are a lot of people out there like that.
Don't quit your day job.
But give yourself some time to write that stuff. You get a thought. I carry a little chapbook even today. I don't know if I have it in here or not. I carry a little chapbook in my purse, and if I think of even a sentence that sounds wonderful, that will be good in a book, I write it down, put it back in the purse. Carry a pen, carry a little notebook, and write something down. And then when you get an idea for a story or half a story or 17 lines, go to your computer and write it out and save it in Word.
I belong to a writers group that meets on Friday morning. Just friendly, we read stuff to each other, no critique.
And I was searching one of my old
thumb drives for something I hadn't read there, and I came across a story called Horse Racing. I didn't remember it. I clicked on it.
I wrote that sucker in 2004, and it was only half written, and it was a really good story. So I sat down in an hour or so and finished the story so I could read it to my group.
I have a point.
And my point is, the creative spark is just going to make your head crazy until you do something with it. So don't give up. Write, write, write. People like me, and there are a lot of us who had a lot of help early in our so-called careers, writing careers. We're more than willing to give you a hand, and there are a lot of us, so don't quit. And that's what I would go back and tell my young self if I had to do that. Don't quit, Judith, which is my actual name. Only my husband and close friends call me that. Don't quit.
Yeah, definitely very important to have mentors in everything you do. I wouldn't have been successful in anything without mentors. I don't think too many people are. You hear people say the self-made man or the self-made woman. Maybe some people are a little more self-made than others, but sit in a room for 2 hours with no noise and just your thoughts and no pens or anyways, and then ask yourself how much of a self-made person you are. I don't know. I mean, they put people in solitary confinement, and those people don't come out with novels for a reason. We need human interaction. We need mentors around us. I'm not seeing the best novels coming from people that have been staring at a wall for 30 days or whatever it is.
Although, on the other hand, there's always the other hand. My heroine, Ayn Rand, locked herself in her New York apartment for 7 years to write either my favorite book, which is Atlas Shrugged, or The Fountainhead. I can't remember which, I'm sorry. But she wanted absolute silence while she wrote, and she was a marvelous writer.
That's obviously a marvelous writer. Yeah, that's a lot of talent.
What's your favorite book, Mike?
My favorite book probably would have been from Stephen King, Needful Things. And
Needful Things?
It was called Needful Things.
Great
and it
book.
Yeah.
Great book.
Yeah.
Scary. Just pierced your heart scary.
Yeah, and the movie, I think they did as much justice to as they could in 2 hours, but there's so many things that are cut out. Read the book before the movie. I know everybody only says that, but I just remember as a kid just not paying attention in class, not wanting to do anything, and anything. I had to read the next page, and the next page, and I think it was Brian, the kid in there. It's like, I became that kid, and, Mr. Gaunt, who was the owner of the shop, you really got to relate with him, and there's so much character development. I mean, he's such a descriptive writer, and all good writers are, I guess. I'm not an author, so I guess that's why I'm really impressed by it. How you were showing me in one of your books, and now I can't remember, but it's like you read a few sentences of something that was so descriptive. It was from 3 Point Shot, and it immediately put me in the moment. It was like I can imagine myself there because you were talking about the description of something about the shoes. It was like the feel of the shoes.
It was the story of John Stockton sending his Olympic shoes to his Gonzaga prep coach.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was obviously a great person. On a lighter note, in this area, John Stockton's pretty involved in this area. He's been a pretty humble guy from everything I've heard. I had a couple friends I went to high school with, actually. His son was just going to Gonzaga, you know, and he was sitting in the crowd just in a normal seat. And
Absolutely.
they sat next to him, and obviously, I mean, he doesn't want a lot of attention, you know, from autographs and stuff. But they were kind of starstruck, so they're just kind of like, oh, hi, you know, hi, John, you know, John Stockton. They kind of made a little conversation. So he gets a little closer to him, and he says, you want an autograph? Oh, if it's not too much trouble, you know. And he took a picture with him, sat there with him the whole game, and yeah, he was, you know, he was a great guy, and I think to be successful in any field, you have to have a certain amount of humbleness.
He's one. I dedicated that book to 3 people, and he was one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's definitely worthy of it. I doubt he'll watch my podcast, but we'll see if you're there. Well, I think we're getting close to an end here. I don't have any more questions right now for you.
You don't?
I don't.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
When are you going to give up your day job and become a TV producer full
Oh,
time?
jeez. That's a long ways in the future. 777. If you've heard successful people talk about this, is to get good at anything at 7 years. And I've heard people on YouTube say this. It says 7 years. Don't get discouraged for 7 years. Just keep on putting out content. I think that's pretty prevalent to just about anything. It's like, look at what's success and what's working, but don't judge yourself on it. And don't judge yourself if you've had a successful book or video or something, and your next 10 or 20 are not as successful. Don't even compare against yourself, because you're just going to beat yourself up over that. And negativity really has very little benefit to us. Learn what you've learned, shake it off, and forget it. But you know, I'm hoping in 7 years this will be somewhat successful, and I have 7 years to go on past that and plan. Basically, people say they have a 10-year plan. I have a 21-year plan, and it's actually pretty detailed. I'm 38. I'll be 59 then. But I think if you don't write things out and plans like I did when I was younger, you kind of, you know, you start drifting through life a little bit. But even worse, what I found myself in one point of my life is searching for success for the point of being successful.
Yes.
And when that is a dangerous person, and a lot of times I was not a good person. I'm embarrassed for some of the things that I said to people growing up in leadership. Very embarrassed to the way that I said things and treated people, because things were centered around me, and I hadn't realized that if you help other people succeed and get what they want, well, they're going to help you and give you a helping hand somewhere down the road. And you know, that's just, I wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
But hopefully in 7 years, you know, I'll be sitting at 5 million subscribers. That's a big goal, and hopefully making some money on this, because I don't think we were put on this earth to work 55 hours in a job that we hate, to pay bills for things that we don't want.
Oh, that's so great.
I think a good way to wrap this up is to talk about this
Martian Schoolgirl book one more time. This book is the story of my life from ages 4 to 16, and it begins, my grandmother thought I was a witch,
and it ends, I married an earthling.
There are also a half a dozen short stories to pad the book out, because the Martian Schoolgirl itself is very, very short. It's really novella length. But
you were talking about sequels.
And I indeed planned a sequel. In fact, it was titled and I began to write it. You were going to ask me if I had any half-written books. I got a full-written one and a couple of half-written ones and a couple started that I could get back to any time. So there's even a teaser to the sequel in this book. It's called Martian Schoolgirl Revisited, the next 16 years. And I wrote the first chapter and I was writing away on the second chapter. And you were talking about the things that you regret in your life? I was writing away on the second chapter when I looked at what I was going to have to write, and I thought about all the things that I was going to have to write in the succeeding 15 years. And I said to myself, I can't write this until all my kids are off the planet. Probably all my grandkids. So there will be no sequel to Martian Schoolgirl.
Are you looking to release anything right now? Are you working on anything right now?
I have a working relationship with an agent, and she has the first 3 chapters of that first book that I ever wrote with its synopsis. It's been cut now to 95,000 words from.
You told me that you never finished your first book that you started writing.
No, I finished it. I just it needed to be cut so badly.
And but I have credit. She's had the 3 chapters in the synopsis for some weeks, so I'm going to have to write like mad on the rest of it if she wants to publish it. You know, if she sells it. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
It's been a pleasure.
I wanted to ask you, do you have any 11 or 12-year-old girls?
I have a 15-year-old girl, Rebecca. She loves reading, so she definitely enjoys that kind of.
Let's give her 3-point shot, because it's not just a boy book.
Well, thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. And that one's already signed. That's for Rebecca.
Well, thank you very much.
You're
I appreciate that so
You're
much.
welcome. Thank you so much for having me on. Buy books, read books, even if they're e-books. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for doing this. Like I said, there'll be some links down below to JR's site, to her books, where you can buy those books. And please like this video, subscribe it. It helps us both. You know, helps me, helps all of our guests. Get notoriety and just talk about books. Like I said, you know, give your kids some books, hopefully the paperback books.
Yeah.
They're coming back right now. So thank you very much for tuning in, guys. I appreciate all the listeners. Have a great week.
Bye.